Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon. I'm D Hammond, Chairman of STIMBA. STIMBA is the Stakeholders in Methyl Bromide Reduction. I'm Chairman of the Board, and my intent this afternoon is to give you a brief update on some of the work that STIMBA has been doing over the past 12 months, and also to highlight some issues that we see facing the log export sector. So I'm going to talk about the issues facing the log export trade, in particularly post-2020. The background to this is that STIMBA has been working for the last decade, since the 2010 EPA decision requiring 100% recapture of methyl bromide as of October 2020. The work STIMBA has done can be broadly broken into 4 phases. The first 2 had largely been completed. We've decided what research we needed to do. We've completed some very, very focused and detailed and internationally respected research. The second 2 phases were around gaining approval through the various statutory processes in New Zealand, and also gaining approval from our trading partners. The final phase was the transition to new fumigation and other technologies and implementation of that. Unfortunately, while the first 2 phases have gone very well, we have been, as many others in this country have, been stymied by the regulatory process and its glacial pace of movement. So this afternoon, I'm going to talk briefly about methyl bromide, about EDN, dual heating and debarking. Just to recap, our current harvest in New Zealand is around 35 million tonnes a year, and we believe that it's going to stay around this level for the foreseeable future. There will be some movement up and down due to market response and so on, but it will be in this sort of order. 60% of that harvest, around 21 million tonnes, will be exported as logs, and of that 21 million tonnes, currently 70%, moving towards 80%, will go as logs to China. Our other key markets, India, Korea and Japan, and a few smaller markets that are evolving. India and China both require either fumigation or risk reduction measures before logs can be exported to them. Turning to methyl bromide, there are a number of moving parts. I want to talk briefly about the judicial review process we implemented, the waiver that we've worked through, the reassessment process, the consents for genera, who are largely the only fumigator available to the log export trade, and some update on lower application rates of methyl bromide. In 2019, STIMBA filed for a judicial review of the 2010 hearing in the High Court. That review sought to challenge the decisions that were made in 2010, even though it was 9 years after the event, because it had only just become apparent that those requirements, those decisions, could not be achieved. That judicial review has been put on hold several times to allow the reassessment process to proceed, and in part because the EPA had promised the court that we would have a decision by Christmas last year. Because the reassessment process has continued to operate, that judicial review application has now been withdrawn by agreement between the 2 parties, the EPA and STIMBA. Instead, STIMBA sought to get a waiver of the 2010 decision that 100% recapture was required from October 2020. The court has granted that waiver, and so now we have until the end of April 2021 before those recapture requirements become mandatory. STIMBA will be seeking a further waiver, likely to be late this month or early next month, unless we can see some rapid progress on the reassessment process that is underway. So I guess that's code for we'll be filing for a further waiver. We've also been working on lower application rates of methyl bromide. Part of our philosophy was we may not be able to move away from methyl bromide, but can we use a whole lot less? And we have done the science that will show that we can use considerably lower rates, and that could result in a reduction of around 40% of our methyl bromide use. To give you some perspective, we currently use around 600 tonnes a year. That would immediately reduce that consumption by somewhere in the order of 250 tonnes, a very substantial change. We've proved that this lower rate of methyl bromide does work in confirmatory tests at a commercial scale, and we have been negotiating with our trading partners to gain approval to proceed with this. Unfortunately, of course, the pace of that decision rests with our trading partners, not with ourselves. Stimba filed a reassessment application for methyl bromide in March 2019. The EPA, through our judicial review process, advised the court that a decision would be available before Christmas 2019 and initially opposed the judicial review on that basis. However, the hearings for the reassessment were not actually carried out until August 2020, and subsequent to that, the decision-making committee have asked for even more air dispersion modelling with no timelines or deadlines attached to that. Furthermore, the EPA is proposing buffer zones that are completely unworkable, and so we're in a situation where one unworkable control that was in the 2010 decision around recapturing 100% of the methyl bromide is to be replaced with a different but equally unworkable control around buffer zones in the 2020 decision. Again, as noted, there's no timelines provided by the regulator, either the DMC or the EPA, and this clearly creates uncertainty and confusion. Genera's consent for the use of methyl bromide expired in early 2020. So back in November 2019, Genera applied for a new consent, and by applying back in 2019, this allowed them to continue using the old consent until such time as the new one is heard and decisions are made. Once again, there is no timeline provided by the regulator, even though the Act imposes timelines. The Bay of Plenty Regional Council have invoked various parts of the Act that allows them to drag this out for as long as they choose. Genera need time and certainty to invest in additional recapture equipment, and that is simply not available at the moment. Moving on to EDN, a registration application was filed in July 2017. Yep, that's over 3 years ago, and hearings were held in August 2018. Safe work instruments, a responsibility of WorkSafe, have been developed as required under the new Health and Safety in the Workplace Act of 2015, but to date they are still sitting within WorkSafe and are yet to go to the Minister for sign-off. Again, there is no delivery of a timeline of when this might happen and when decisions will be made, and you kind of suggest that there's a theme starting to emerge that nobody is willing to commit to any timelines. EDN has been, there are proposals for EDN to be used in trial shipments from Australia to China. This is quite a positive move because it indicates that both the Chinese and other log exporters are exploring the use of EDN as a possible alternative to methyl bromide. However, until the Genera consent is renewed, we will not be able to use EDN in Tauranga, which, as we all know, is one of the larger export ports, because it is not contained in the current Genera consent. MPI, Stimba and the Forest Owners Association are working with trading partners to get acceptance of EDN in the marketplace, and this work continues despite the delays in getting registration. Joule heating is a project that Stimba has been working on for a number of years with University of Canterbury. We have some small projects still ongoing, due to be completed in the next few months, which were designed to de-risk the construction and design of a pilot plant. We've had no success in getting a pilot plant underway. There's a capital cost of between 5 and 10 million in our best estimate, and this is obviously going to be a significant hurdle to overcome. In the long term, I firmly believe that dual heating may well be a potential non-fumigant solution to our phytosanitary challenge for export logs, but equally I am convinced that it is unlikely to be commercialised in the foreseeable future. Debarking has gained in popularity as log exporters have become more and more concerned about the ongoing ability to fumigate logs for export to China and India. A number of exporters have put in debarkers, but unfortunately India is completely unwilling to even discuss the use of debarking as a risk mitigation measure. So debarking is not available as a potential option for exports to India. There has been a significant increase in debarked volume, and we've seen debarkers put in by timberlands and various other players. They are of various scale and various technologies, and also provide quite variable outcomes in terms of quality. Debarking large cylindrical pruned logs is relatively straightforward, but it becomes more and more problematic as you get into A-grade logs, and then even more so when you get into K-grade, KI, and the small export saw logs, which have branch stubs, are less cylindrical and smaller in volume. There is a possible need for the development of suitable standards to ensure phytosanitary assurance is able to be given to our trading partners. So in looking at the conclusions, our export log trade now faces considerable risk of serious dislocation and of cost increases. Some of those cost increases will come about as a result of not being able to fully load ships if we don't have fumigated logs to go as topstow. We will have to only carry underdeck cargoes or debarked cargoes, and that will in turn mean more ships required, greater congestion on the ports, and more cost. Importantly, if we do not have access to methyl bromide and we haven't got EDN over the line, the trade with India ceases, as they will not accept phosphine or debarking as a suitable treatment or mitigation measure. The failure of regulators to engage strategically and to communicate and to make timely decisions has resulted in substantial uncertainty and leaves us in the position where we are now, with several $1 billion worth of export logs in a year are under threat. Controls proposed by EPA in their staff report on the methyl bromide reassessment have the potential, as I noted before, to replace one unworkable control with another equally unjustified, unsubstantiated by science, and unworkable control. It is highly probable that Stimba will continue to seek waivers to extend the period of use for methyl bromide until such time as we have certainty about both the reassessment and EDN, and it is also possible that we will seek further judicial reviews or appeal decisions made based on what we are currently hearing. EDN approvals have not been delivered in a timely fashion by either WorkSafe or the EPA, and this in turn has prevented a possible transition away from methyl bromide. The possible option of a non-fumigant treatment in the form of dual heating remains a long way off and is clearly not going to resolve our present challenges. And that's the good news. The bad news is that we could well end up a bit like the guy in the photograph in having to process substantially more logs in New Zealand, and I'm not sure that we have an efficient system to do that. Thank you for your time, and I'm hopeful that we can find a resolution to this as soon as possible.